Hi, my name's Dan Lynch, and I'll be hosting Floss Weekly in Randall's absence. You can join me and Randy Harper, FreeBSD Girl, as we talk to Chris Webber of the Media Goblin project. Media Goblin is a free, open-source media hosting solution. So join us next for Floss Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly number 242, recorded Wednesday, the 13th of February, 2013. Media Goblin. Okay, so welcome to another Floss Weekly. As you'll be able to tell by now, probably from my voice, I'm not Randall Schwartz. He's away at the moment. My name is Dan Lynch, and I'm standing in this week. And we're joined by Randy Harper, who hasn't been on for a little while. Randy, how are you doing?
I am so glad to be back. It has been a long time, and it's lovely to see your face again.
Yeah, this is the first show we've done together as well, so that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched your shows before, but yeah, I'm slowly working my way in there and dealing with the other co-hosts, but... Yeah, it's been a while. But you're definitely
Excellent.
not Randall now.
No, that's true. He's lost too much weight, and I've also lost too much hair, I think, for me to be Randall at this point. But never mind, that's not what we're here to talk about. So today's guest is Media Goblin. We've got Chris Webber, who's the lead developer of Media Goblin. And Media Goblin is a free software. It's part of the GNU project. So it's licensed under the GPL, the GNU GPL, sorry, the AGPL, which we'll talk about if you want to know more about that. And it's a free software media hosting solution, which you can install as part of your website. You can use it like Flickr, which is what he compares it to sometimes. You can also host video and audio as well. So he's going to tell us all about that. So have you had a chance to look at this at all, Randy?
I looked at the webpage admittedly briefly last night, and it looks really cool. I'm actually pretty excited about getting a chance to play with it, and I watched their video. If you guys out there haven't seen the video yet, I highly recommend you go to their webpage and watch their promotional video. It's pretty good.
Okay, so let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Christopher Webber of the Media Goblin project. Chris, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. So where are you calling us from today?
I'm calling from Madison, Wisconsin. And in the office that's in my apartment that I hunker over my keyboard every day, hacking on Media Goblin stuff. So, yep.
Ah, cool. Like a true archetypal hacker. We all like to be in the dark somewhere, hunched over a keyboard, typing away. Yeah. So I've been told, anyway. So this is a slightly off-topic question, but is it snowing where you are? Do you get much snow up that way? Because we've got snow here where I am, and that's the first time it's happened in a while.
It's not snowing presently, though we definitely have snow on the ground. We had a really awful blizzard this year that almost made me miss my family trip this year around Christmas. But it came down really hard, which is interesting considering last year in the upper Midwest we had a complete lack of snow. In fact, I think we had a complete lack of winter, and so it's decided to return this year. So,
yeah, excellent. So I'll get off the weather questions before people get too bored with that, and unless we rename the show Weather Weekly or something. I don't know if there is a Weather Weekly yet. Maybe Leo wants to do that. All right, and so we're here to talk about Media Goblin, which is the project that you work on. So can you give us the overall view of Media Goblin, of what it is and how it came to be?
Sure. So Media Goblin is a free software project that is it's a web publishing system for media. Actually, the shortcut way of understanding it would be to say that it's you could consider it a free software distributed replacement to stuff like Flickr and YouTube and et cetera. We actually have image support, video support, audio support. We recently got 3D model support. We even have ASCII art support. So if you're into ASCII art, which I'm probably the only user who is, you have that too. But it attempts to be a publishing system that tries to integrate these all together while looking nice and very modern.
Yeah, excellent. Sorry, you were about to say it's part of the GNU project, yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to say, yep.
Huh. Yeah, and well, we should talk a little bit about that. So with it being part of the GNU project, how did that come about? So you're a big GNU and GPL supporter, obviously, so you work closely with those guys?
I do tend to work pretty closely with the FSF on various things. I at least pester them about a lot of things pretty often. So Media Goblin's a GNU project. Part of the reason why it became a GNU project, I think, is because there's kind of a recognition that free software is not very well developed in this space of like well-developed free software applications. And so Media Goblin was, the discussions that led to Media Goblin becoming part of the GNU project was related to seeing how the perceived need to fill that. I am a big copyleft supporter. I am a fan of the AGPL and et cetera. And I've had actually quite a bit of interaction with the Free Software Foundation, et cetera, before Media Goblin work. I did some animations for that video, Patent Absurdity, a number of years ago. And when I was at Creative Commons prior to Media Goblin, I used to pester them about a lot of licensing complexity questions and et cetera. So,
Excellent. And so we should talk more about the technical kind of side of Media Goblin. So you described it as a replacement to something like Flickr, and it is licensed under the AGPL as well. So how come it's licensed under the AGPL? Given what you've just told me, I think that's pretty obvious, but maybe we should discuss that a little bit as well.
Well, actually, and I actually just came off a panel at FOSDEM about the AGPL. I'm a big supporter of the AGPL. I think the AGPL hasn't gotten as much adoption in some ways as people have expected at this point. But I think that, so the AGPL, for those who aren't familiar, is like the GPL, except that it also applies to a requirement to distribute over network services. So you can't quite close it off by just serving the application and never actually giving back the changes you're making locally. And the reason we chose that is because we think that the requirement to give back is really useful and important. And also, I think that that adoption in the web services space is pretty interesting, and I think we need to see more of it in some ways. I think part of the reason we haven't seen as much of it is because we haven't actually seen that many applications released in some ways, as in terms of applications themselves being released. We've been seeing a lot of infrastructure being released and not a lot of applications. So I'm starting to ramble. But
no, that's great. That's okay. That's what we do here. Don't worry about that. So we should mention, actually, I mean, I didn't, thankfully you kind of did it there, but I didn't really explain what the AGPL was for anybody who may not know. I just jumped straight in there. So you kind of described it right there. I mean, people will probably be familiar with the GPL, the GNU General Public License, which requires people to release any code that they've modified that's linked into GPL code. You can't just go and slam a proprietary thing on top of it that's linked in. And at the AGPL, or the Affero GPL, to give it its full title, does the same thing for web applications. And as I understand it, the way it does that is your web application usually has to have a function to deliver the source code, to print out the source code. Is that all you need to do to comply with AGPL?
That's the main thing that's required in complying with the AGPL. And actually, we do it in a really minimalist way in Media Goblin currently. I know Bradley Kuhn is really interested, and I think he built a prototype of a way where the application can itself serve up its source code and have some sort of library to make that easy. We aren't using any such thing like that. What we actually have is we just link to the source code of the application itself and the Git repository. If for some reason you're actually running off of a different branch, we encourage you to change a line in the config file that just points to wherever you are currently, whatever like Git repository you are basically having your code off of. And we consider that good compliance. So,
excellent. And so getting back to Media Goblin, then you described it as a replacement to Flickr or SoundCloud is another description I've heard. So I can just install. I would get the code and then install this on my web server. What's it written in?
So it's, you can take it. You can install it right now. It's already works. I mean, there's plenty of stuff for us to do, but there's definitely already a lot of stuff that works, and we have quite a few users already. It's written in Python, which is actually probably one of the things that makes it a little bit more complex to install than if it were a PHP application, which is partly intentional, actually. I think that when kind of this autonomo.us excitement about starting free software web services was kind of spinning up, a lot of people were like, we should do things under PHP because PHP is the easiest thing to deploy on shared hosting, which it is. But I think that I think that web development is moving away from that. I think that a lot of web development is happening on people deploying to virtual machines and stuff like that. So one of the reasons I actually chose Python was both because it's actually the language I really love, and also because I think that free software needs to catch up and figure out how to actually move into that space and make deployment easy there, which it's currently not necessarily easy. There's quite a bit that we're trying to do to make it easier, including there's work to get a Debian package, and there's quite a bit of stuff happening that's interesting in the world of stuff like, I'm trying to remember, stuff like OpenShift, and I'm trying to remember the canonical /Ubuntu one, but stuff to basically make deployment easier. Again, I'm probably going to ramble through this entire interview, and but that's the reason behind the choice of Python, which I really enjoy as a language, and I think the community that works on Media Goblin seems to as well.
Looking at your project page last night, and I'll admit it's the first time I've actually looked at the page, and sorry if you guys can hear that traffic. It's pretty crazy out there. I was a bit curious as to why you're drawing the comparison to Flickr instead of something like Gallery, because when I was looking at it, my first thought was like, wow, this looks like a slicker version of Gallery.
Right. So yeah, actually, I guess we're somewhat being lame and taking the shortcut of trying to relate to something that's proprietary. It's partly I guess part of the reason for that is I think a lot of people who are already, oh shoot, and my screen just locked. But anyway, but actually I think that we are pretty comparable to Gallery. Maybe we should add that to the list of things. And you're right. If you're wanting to look at a free software replacement, Gallery is actually another interesting route, though written in PHP and with some different design decisions and et cetera. So I don't know if that was a useful response.
Oh, yeah, it was. Sorry about that. I had to unmute my microphone to get rid of some of this traffic noise. So does it have more of like a social networking component to it? Because that's the real value I see from things like Flickr and using Facebook and Picasa Web is you have the whole social networking thing. Or is this meant for more of, you know, a standalone, send people to your website and let them see it there?
Right. So that's actually one of the goals of Media Goblin, which it's not quite there yet. To be perfectly honest, what we do have a commenting system, but the commenting system isn't great because it requires that you also be a user on the site. I think that'll be changing very shortly. But the main thing that actually I think is going to be the main key ingredient in order to be able to make it so that you can have a bunch of different sites running Media Goblin and still have a social experience that's nice between them is to actually have federation support, which is one of the things that's on our near horizon. Right now, I'm actually focusing on plugin infrastructure right now. The development I usually do in Media Goblin tends to be kind of setting down a lot of foundation so that a lot of our community ends up doing a lot of stuff on top of that. So I'm focusing on plugin infrastructure right now, but after that, we're intending to work on federation support so that we can start building it so that it feels like there's as nice of a social experience as you have on proprietary web services, with the same type of feeling you have of having it all in one big silo, but instead in a distributed manner. But that's something we don't have yet, but that's on the very near horizon.
Yeah, I think the whole kind of social networking side of it is something that people seem to really get into. I mean, I've got to be honest, people are going to hate me for this, but I don't use Pinterest. I never have, but people tell me how amazing it is all the time, just because it's like a social way of pinning photos and so on. One thing I was curious about is, in comparison to things like you were talking about SoundCloud maybe, and you mentioned Flickr, obviously, is there a way to, if I have an instance of a Media Goblin on my website, is there any kind of way I can generate like a little snippet of code like I would with something like YouTube, where I could embed that on someone else's site, or they could embed it on their site? Is that a function that you might think about if you haven't got it already?
That's one of the things we don't have already. It's one of the things that I'm interested in adding. We do have part of the reason why we have so many of these different media types is because we have kind of an infrastructure that was designed to have a flexible design for multiple media types. One of the things that we haven't plugged into it yet, but we've already discussed the infrastructure of how it's going to work, is embedding tools. And so that's another planned feature that we don't actually have yet. But it's something I'm very interested in. If one of the listeners who's listening to this gets really excited about that and is like, that's a feature I need, I'd encourage you to actually get in contact with us on the Media Goblin channel on irc.freenode.net, because that's definitely something we want and definitely something we're planning.
And we talked a little bit before about, I was saying about deployment and so on, and you were saying you want to make deployment as easy as possible, because I do think that's an area where perhaps some of the AGPL applications have fallen down a little bit. You're running on Python, so what do I need to run this? I mean, I need to run Python presumably? Could I use something like Mod Python on Apache? What do I need to kind of grab the code and get it working?
You do need Python. You could use Mod Python. I forget whether or not anybody's currently using Mod Python. Most people are using FastCGI to deploy their application. The instructions there's one of the issues, and I think one of the things that gets complex about this is that part of the problem with the web applications is that there's so many different ways that you can configure them, which also makes it a bit overwhelming. The configuration recommendation that we explain, like the main version that we explain in the docs, actually suggests using Nginx with FastCGI. But we actually have but there's a wiki page that we have on wiki.mediagoblin.org/deployment, I believe, that has a number of recipes for if you want to do it on Apache and etc. But I actually do think that this is one of the problems that we currently have with one of the reasons why we haven't seen real adoption of free software in the web services space is because, quite frankly, it's really hard to do. It's a lot of work. If you've ever touched an Apache config file before, you know what kind of a universe of its own language it is, and that's a lot of stuff to learn how to do. That usually you have to configure very manually, server to server, and it's also quite a bit of stuff that that takes a lot of work to maintain. At FOSDEM, when I was on the AGPL panel, one of the things that I was saying there was that I think we have to make installing and configuring free software projects at least as easy as apt-get install the package name. Because if we don't, and that's not to say that like apt-get install whatever is like a super great user interface for the average person, but if we don't even at least get to that level of things, then we're really limiting the amount of audience that can get into using free software web services like this.
And you mentioned apt-get install there, and you also mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you're working on a Debian package, is that right? So at the moment, you're currently working towards getting a Debian package into the repositories?
Right. So one of our contributors is working on that. I believe his name is Simon FT in the channel, also a Madison local, actually. He's working on that. It's a little bit... we've got a lot of dependencies that I think that have to be worked through, so it's a little bit slow going. But I do... My hope is actually that... this version of Debian is frozen. My hope is that that will get packaged in a number of distributions. But since Debian is in some ways one of the more slow-going ones and usually behind, my hope is that Debian-wise, at least, we'll see it packaged in the next stable of release of Debian after Wheezy. But I'm not quite. That's largely hope. But there is a lot of work being done towards that direction at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Right. I think your mic might be muted there. Sorry, Randy. We were all wondering what was going on there. We can hear you
from
now.
both sides, in Skype and on the microphone. So I don't always like storing all of my images on my local box because of like backups and having to worry about things like that. Do you offer cloud storage options with Media Goblin? Like cloud storage support?
Right. So we do have an extensible storage backend. We only have two main implementations of the storage implementation currently. There's a local file system one, and then there's also a OpenStack, the OpenStack cloud storage system Swift. We have an implementation that you can hook into that. So if you'd like to do your serving over Swift or something like that, you can actually hook that into Media Goblin, and then you could use something like Rackspace Cloud Files or HP, or if you even wanted to run one of your own, you could do that. So that is an option at the moment.
And I imagine that's really useful because I was just thinking about, I mean, obviously I understand the kind of the arguments in terms of freedom and privacy and so on in having all my stuff on my own server. But say I suddenly, one of my pictures gets posted on Slashdot or something like that. I don't want to kill all the bandwidth on my server. So I'm just wondering if that's a consideration for a lot of users, the amount of bandwidth that they're going to use on, say, their own server hosting all the media themselves. Do you come across that at all?
As far as I know, nobody's gotten Slashdotted on any of their photos yet, but that's definitely something that I'm concerned about, and definitely one of the reasons that we built in that infrastructure. I mean, and one of the reasons why I think OpenStack ended up happening first is because at least that's a good free software implementation, though we certainly wouldn't be against including something like some other implementations of storage systems, but I actually think that that's really important. There's, I think, still some more work that we can do since nobody's actually been hit by a hard like Slashdotting and et cetera yet. We haven't had the kind of trial run of that yet, but and there's some more work that we're going to be doing to improving the caching system in Media Goblin and stuff soon. But it's definitely something I'm thinking about, and I definitely think that the requirement to scale things is definitely something that I've been thinking about from Media Goblin since its initial design, and not just as in terms of serving things, but also as in terms of, I mean, the very fact that we have video support means that, well, what happens if you want to run a site with a number of users that are uploading video? I mean, since Media Goblin is doing transcoding via GStreamer, that's actually quite a bit of work. If you've ever run transcoding on your machine, you know how it can completely take over things. So one of the things that we've planned for is an infrastructure that's designed so that it could be scaled out to multiple machines. We're using something called Celery, which is a queuing system for Python, so that you could actually set up, theoretically, although I think nobody is doing it yet, you could set up multiple worker machines to do transcoding and resizing of images and stuff like that. So,
okay, yeah. So you could almost have a Media Goblin farm going on in some way,
right.
Web farm. That's really cool. I mean, I was curious to know as well. I mean, what kind of things are people doing with this right now? I mean, you mentioned that they haven't hit the kind of Slashdot specific problem yet. And we've talked a lot about images and Flickr and so on. Are a lot of people using it for video and maybe audio as well right now?
There's a number of people who are using, I mean, most of the use right now is by people who are enthusiasts of generally, it's either kind of hackers and their families using it, or it's people who are excited about the idea of Media Goblin. I still think we have a bit of ways to go, as in terms of kind of hitting like the mainstream of hitting all the things everybody needs for kind of a mainstream instance. In some ways, but there are people who are using it to upload. Well, I mean, all of the features that are been described. We also so. I think it's usable for all of those things, but still at the moment, most of our adoption, partly because it's a bit hard to install and it's both a young project, we've kind of cornered the hacker baby photo market at the moment. But I actually think there's a bit more that I'd like to do to make it useful for some other things. One of the things I'd like to add support for soon is enclosure support on the feed so that it could be useful for stuff like video and audio podcasting and stuff like that, which I don't think would be too hard to do. It just needs to be implemented. But yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. And I suppose we've talked about hosting and bandwidth and so on. I'm wondering if maybe long term there could be some kind of income stream around like hosted instances of this. That sounds stupid, I know, because this whole thing is about taking control of your own data, but then we're saying we'll get a hosted version. But does that make sense? Would you think people would go for maybe a hosted version of this to support the project as well? Maybe pay a monthly fee or something?
It's definitely something I'm thinking about. I mean, so at the moment, I'm funded to work on Media Goblin full time from a crowdfunding campaign we did with the Free Software Foundation, which has been enough to pay for my salary for a year. But I'm definitely thinking about what needs to happen after that, because I think having dedicated resources on developing Media Goblin is really important for its success. And I also think that Media Goblin, I think that the other issue is that I think we should be getting Media Goblin to the point where almost everyone who's technically capable is able to run one without inconveniencing themselves too much. But not everyone's going to do that either. I mean, not everyone has the technical ability, even if we got it as simple as apt-get install Media Goblin, to be able to do that themselves. So it's definitely a route that I'm thinking about, is possibly doing Media Goblin hosting as a way of providing an income stream. Halfway through the year, I'm going to have to start thinking more seriously about how to keep, the funding that I'm working on this, since I'd like to work more than just this year going on that. So that's definitely a route that I'm thinking about. And I think that actually that's important, considering not everyone's going to be able to run their own instance. But I think that trying to encourage as many people who can run their own instance as possible to run their own instance is really important for it to actually succeed in the dream that it's trying to sell.
And you were talking about the development there. So you're obviously the main developer on this, but what's the kind of the community like? What's the split like? How many people are working on this, and what's the kind of community involvement? Well,
the IRC channel, which I encourage people to join if they like, on Media Goblin on irc.freenode.net. It's very active. I often have a hard time keeping up with it, which is a great problem to have. We usually have about 5 people being pretty active at any given time, and then we have a good. But I think we've had a little bit over 50 contributors. I forget whether or not that's including translators. I'm pretty sure with including translators, we're well over 50 contributors. But we have quite a few people who have been contributing to the project. We also have, and I'm actually not the only person who's been paid to work on Media Goblin development. I'm actually the second person to be paid to work on it, even though I'm the founder. Jor Vanborg, or I don't know if his name's Vanborg or Wanborg, but Jor, anyway, was the first one to be paid by the Icelandic government, actually, to add features to Media Goblin, which is how we got our API and et cetera. So we have a pretty vibrant community of people who are very excited. And it's a community full of very nice people. I try to kind of rule it with an iron fist of kindness. So the community, we try very hard to be very welcoming to new contributors, and we try very hard to be, to be supportive of each other and et cetera. And I think we've succeeded in that regard, at least.
Right. Okay. That sounds really cool. And I'm curious, were the Icelandic government using Media Goblin for something? How come they came to fund development on it?
There was a project related to I'm pretty sure it's related to an open, it's related to an open educational resources repository. I'm not actually sure the status of it, though. But I know that was their main intention, was with some open educational resources work that they've been working on, and they were interested in Media Goblin to be used in relation to that.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned it's written in Python, and we talked a little bit about Python. Have you written this kind of from the ground up in Python? You didn't look at, say, a Python web framework and build on top of that? Did you build straight up from the ground, if you like?
So this is something that I've done a great job of botching the explanation of multiple times. Okay. So Media Goblin is written in Python, and if you're familiar with Django, it looks a lot like Django. I used to say in my talks that Media Goblin is like Django minus Django, and then people would get confused and thought, I had one person in a talk say that you should use this other framework because then you'll end up like the Media Goblin people otherwise, and use Django, and then you'll end up removing all of Django, where actually we did quite the opposite. So I shouldn't keep saying that, even though I just did. What we actually did is we took a very minimalist approach, and this is partly related to the development that I had done at Creative Commons earlier, which had a similar infrastructure. The application is actually a very minimalist WSGI application that just has a lot of good libraries just wrapped together. It doesn't actually take a lot of work in Python these days to do that, because the libraries are so well developed that actually putting together an application that just says, I want this templating engine, and I want this for the request objects, and I want this database system and everything, and just hooking that all together isn't that difficult. So But the systems that we're using a templating engine that looks almost exactly like Django's templating engine, but with, in my opinion, a few improvements. We're using SQL Alchemy for the database stuff and et cetera. But if you've come from something like either Django or Flask, which actually our infrastructure looks almost exactly like Flask, even though we're not using it, it should be extremely familiar to you already.
And you kind of talked a little bit about it there, but what was the reasoning behind wanting to do everything, yourself, if you like, rather than taking something like Django? You weren't keen on some of the design features of, say, Django, or there are many other. I'm drawing a blank now, but there are so many other Python web frameworks. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them was I was inspired by a article that Ian Bicking, who's a kind of prominent Python developer, had written an article that was another do-it-yourself web framework, which was showing, that it's not that difficult to actually hook together these components. And truth be told, it hasn't been that complicated. Media Goblin's core application, is actually very small, since we're using so many other things. And there was actually part of the reason is actually historical in Media Goblin. One of the reasons was originally we were thinking we were using MongoDB, which we did for the first number of months. And then we actually removed that and switched to SQL, not because we didn't like MongoDB, but actually because of a lot of the community's desire to switch away, and also because of some concerns that it actually might be harder to scale down. And a lot of people wanted to run smaller instances. But partly because of that, I figured if we're swapping out the database anyway, and I also didn't like, there are a number of issues that I have with Django's templating engine, or one of them was that it didn't have ELIF support, like an else if conditional, which I added a patch, and I was like, they never accepted my patch, but now they've accepted my patch, so so that's irrelevant now. The other one was that some opinions about the way that you pass arguments into functions and stuff in the engine. So admittedly, it's a lot of kind of I had very strongly opinionated thoughts on the way that the application should be laid out. But it's also led to some flexibility in some ways. There's a certain point when you're using a pre-built framework where you end up finding that you need to move beyond some of the structure of the framework, and then you end up kind of fighting the framework. And because so we've had both ups and downs as in terms of taking this unframework type approach. But the downs being that we have to we have to do a lot of work to hook things together ourselves, and it's also some maintenance work. But the upside is that we're also fairly flexible in that we knew the type of plugin system that we wanted, and we can move things around within the application core to really fit that plugin system very easily and stuff like that. So it's a mixed bag. But anyway, the reasoning is partly historical. There's a page on our wiki that explains my original rationale. But there you go.
Okay. No, it makes sense to me. I don't know if you mentioned it there. I might have missed it. But did you look at Twisted or any of those things? Are you using Twisted or any of those kind of components in it?
We're not using Twisted. Twisted is we're not doing the same kind of crazy asynchronous stuff that Twisted is, as in terms of. I mean, I actually did think about Twisted partly for when we were deciding whether or not we were going to go with Celery as a queuing server for the kind of asynchronous processing of stuff. But I thought that, so we have a non-asynchronous, just kind of WSGI, Python WSGI, like standard web application. And I actually feel fairly comfortable with that. I think Twisted is a really cool project. It's also, I also tend to get lost in a lot of Twisted applications because of the kind of massive callbackness of it. But I really do think that Twisted is a system that's very intelligently designed. So we decided pretty early on that wasn't a direction we wanted to go, but I think that it's pretty great for a lot of things.
Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I know. Yeah, I didn't really thought about that. I suppose, you're not doing the asynchronous stuff, so maybe Twisted is not quite the same kind of paradigm, if you like. So, who's using Media Goblin right now? I mean, you mentioned that it's kind of growing. It's a fairly young project and it's still growing. So, who's using it now? What's the kind of most exciting thing that you've seen people doing with it?
I mean, so again, the stuff that the Icelandic government is interested in is actually very exciting to me. And a lot of people are using it just kind of for their own personal sites. To be honest, we don't have any really kind of grand installations of Media Goblin at this time. I think that's partly because it's still so young. It's somewhat hard to install and get running. It's not that hard to install and get running, but it's not like as easy as just apt-get install whatever. But we don't have like any really huge. The most exciting instance that we have in some ways is not run by me at all. It's run by Yor, who I mentioned earlier, who did the contracting with the Icelandic government, which is on goblin.se, GOBBLIN.se. And that tends to be running the like most kind of bleeding edge version of Media Goblin that there is. For the most part, I'm just excited right now that we have a lot of people who are kind of running it for their own sites. And the adoption is kind of similar to the adoption actually of gallery-like sites. I think for us to move beyond that, in some ways, actually requires that we do get federation and stuff working and get our plugin system really well developed. And those are the next two big things. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I was curious to know a little bit about. You mentioned some of the history of the project. So, how old actually is the project, and you know how did it come to kind of, you know, how did it all come together?
So it's actually about I think it's actually approaching 2 years old at this time. The project started. It was actually inspired originally by. In about 2010, I think, is when I was wrapping up my work with FSF on the Patent Absurdity animations, and I was trying to figure out what my next project was going to be. And it was around that time that, for those who are familiar with, I guess, Autonomo.us, which I think, or Autonomous, which was a working group trying to look at solving this kind of free software not existing in the web services space and this problems of centralized hosting and et cetera. I was very inspired by that, and I was very inspired by StatusNet and et cetera at the time. And I did a lot of thinking trying to decide what type of project I wanted to do next. And I decided I wanted to try to tackle the media hosting side of things because that's what I felt I really wanted for my own use, and also because I felt like I wasn't happy with any of the existing solutions. I was somewhat inspired by some of Maureen Duffy's mock-ups for this thing she created called Design Hub. And I was just and I figured that it was something I knew how to do. Since Python web development is something I know how to do, I figured I should jump into doing it. It actually got delayed for about a year because I got a really bad case of repetitive strain injury, which so I waited for that to kind of fall back. But then when I actually started it, I kind of did a pre-announcement on Identica that was like, oh, I'm starting this thing. And then a bunch of people got really excited. And then there was some excitement about it turning into a GNU project. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, crap, I have to take this thing seriously. And a huge and then our community just started to, in some ways, kind of roll into place because I think a number of key things got people excited about jumping in and contributing, and a lot of that since then has been trying to keep up with the excitement that's built around it. So,
okay, so I was curious. You mentioned earlier about when you talked about your funding campaign that a lot of people funded your development and said, "Oh, it's great to see the FSF funding software development." And I think one of the things that to be honest, I probably have a criticism I have leveled at the I can't say it. I'll get it right now. FSF, sorry about that, just something there going wrong there. Yeah, is that I think that partly a lot of what they work on it, there's this big thing about RMS and the fact that he doesn't use the internet in the way that maybe you or I use the internet. And I worry that somehow the whole kind of foundation is not always focusing on the things that the end users really care about. But it seems with Media Goblin, this really is something that people care about, and that probably is a good way to promote the free software message again. So how do you feel about that?
So I feel very strongly about the importance of trying to communicate, do messaging seriously. I think that I mean, one of the reasons that I got involved in this is because I actually am excited about working with the FSF on messaging of various types of things, which I am opinionated on. And I think the FSF actually does a lot of important work as in terms of the type of messaging that they do. But I do think that there's also quite a bit of important work to be done as in terms of the way that we go about messaging. When we worked on the Media Goblin campaign, one of the things that we spent a lot of time on was the campaign video that we put out. I was and I actually I dumped a lot of time into it, enough time that I was somewhat worried that maybe I was dumping too much time into it. But the response has been pretty positive. The type of messaging that we tried to construct around it was something that would both be descriptive to people who are already familiar with free software, but also could explain the messaging about why free software and these types of things are important to people who haven't gotten involved in free software before. One of the things that we spent time on in the video is there's a number of animations that I put together in Blender that show things like a graph of the internet and like one node going out in this decentralized network, and one of them and like the network recovers itself, and then there's another one where like there's this kind of the network's being censored, and one of the things that I think came out of that is a lot of people would come up to me who had never seen anything related to like had no idea about free software or any of its core ideas, and would express that that they really got it was really clear to them what we were trying to do in the campaign and with Media Goblin generally. And I think that's really important to work on. I don't know if we worked on it too much. I put in a lot of time trying to storyboard it and do the animations and et cetera. But I think it paid off because I think that constructing really clear messaging is one of the things that free software projects tend to do badly a lot, and is one of the things that actually is one of the most important things for us to do, because a lot of the vision of free software is, I think, best accessed if it's for more than just people who already understand what free software is. So if we're going to actually capture the true ideas of like what free software could really be, then I think we need to be able to speak to an audience that's more than just people who have already, bought into the ideas of free software. And that means creating messaging that tries to be both clear to people who already know about free software, but also provides good actual explanations that are visually engaging, that feel really great to people who have just not really given it much thought before.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my problems with a lot of the way that open source in general treats the word marketing. It's not a dirty word. If you really want to get your message out there, and if you really want to get your open source project out there to the world and have, your average mom and pop using it, a video is going to speak louder than words. People like videos. You can communicate ideas more easily. And I don't think a lot of people realize how much effort goes into things like storyboarding out issues and deciding how you're going to say things. And I think there's a big lesson for other projects to learn here from the way you've done this video. I mean, I'd like to see more people doing things like that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. It's good to hear.
Yeah.
So do
and
you
the
have any
Oscar
other
goes to-
ideas for how to get your message out there as far as marketing goes and talking to the community and getting it out to people at home?
I think, to be honest, so as I said, I did spend a bunch of time working on that video as in terms of trying to think about messaging, but I'm also not always the best person as in terms of messaging. I hold a lot of importance in it. A lot of our good messaging actually comes from one of our other core community Media Goblin people, which is Deb Nicholson, who spends a lot of time on helping turn the really awful blog posts that I create every time that we're putting out a release into something that's human readable. I think that it's important to try to write your stuff in a way that it's certain things should be very technically detailed. Other things, I think it's very easy to get lost in the technical detail in a way that it doesn't that it doesn't engage people. Every time we put out a release, usually what happens is we have kind of a goofy process, and I think actually a lot of people complain, and I complain sometimes as well about the projects that come up with a release name that makes no sense, and of course I complain about it, and then I do that anyway. Every one of our releases, we try to I do some sort of release artwork for it that tries to make it exciting, and Deb Nicholson writes up a blog post that tries to and we work together to try to create the messaging that I give her an outline, and she turns it into something exciting. And I think that you're right that the term marketing is often perceived by people in free software as a bad word. And I think part of the reason for that is because we have a tendency to believe, and I think are correct in some ways, that this isn't a game of popularity. It's a game of principles. And that's true, actually. I'm definitely on the free software, definitely on the super principle, want to try to push forward principles type direction. But it's actually, in order to get your message out there, in order for people to really understand it, I think it's important to take that time. And if you can't do it alone, then it might be that there are other people within your community who are really good at that type of thing. But yeah, I think that marketing is something that's really important to free software that we just don't do enough of. And that includes the marketing of ideas.
Yeah, it is. It does seem that I think you're right that a lot of people treat marketing as a kind of a dirty word, and they don't like it. But it is definitely very important for all kind of projects. And another project that I quickly want to talk about, which you were involved with some time ago, is Creative Commons. You mentioned it a couple of times, but I would hope everyone listening to this show knows what Creative Commons is. But what were you doing at Creative Commons, and how was that? How did that kind of come together? How did you come to work in Creative Commons?
So a number of years ago, I was working at the Participatory Culture Foundation. I left, and after that job ended, I was actually looking for something else that would allow me to work on free software and free culture type issues, because that's really what I believe in. And I especially get really excited about the intersection of free software and free culture, which when I worked at Creative Commons, my job was writing free software to support free culture infrastructure, so it was great. But a lot of what I ended up doing at Creative Commons was a couple of things. One of the things was kind of a very boring infrastructure level things. People would not believe that the Creative Commons website is as technically complex as it ended up becoming, because a lot of code was written that ended up evolving in a way that makes sense when you have a project that's that keeps evolving for a long time. So I ended up spending a bunch of time cleaning it up and working on the metadata infrastructure that runs the site and et cetera. And that's kind of boring, but was most of what I did. But then I also did quite a bit of work involving two other things that are both pretty much, well, I mean, they're both kind of two sides of one coin, which is kind of the intersection of free software and free culture from Creative Commons' point. I tried to do a lot of work when I was there to try to bridge the gap between Creative Commons and things like the free software community. And that sometimes came about in things like we worked with the FSF on looking at CC0 compatibility with the GPL and its acceptability as a free software license. If you know enough about that, you also know the kind of irony of the way that ended up ending when with the patent concerns when we ended up submitting it to the OSI. But we also ended up working with the FSF. One of the things that I was working on before I ended up exiting CC was about CC 4.0 compatibility with CC BY and CC BY SA with the GPL, because I think that licensing compatibility is really important. Even though I don't think that CC licenses should be used for software, I think there's some issues where it comes technically complex, and having that compatibility is really useful. One of the other things that I did with the FSF was CC, the FSF, and Mozilla ended up actually working on something called Liberated Pixel Cup, which was a game contest that had a set of like art assets that were under Creative Commons that tried to have a style guide, kind of like the Tango Icon style guide that explained how the whole pixel art looked and everything. And then we had a contest in two parts. First, an art contest that people made artwork that was along these lines, and then a game contest where people used the actual artwork to create video games. The somewhat embarrassing side of this is that after I left CC, I ran out of a lot of time to kind of keep pushing the judging along, and we ended up getting so many entries that the judges who signed up to do the judging couldn't keep up with it, because a lot of it was like building and compiling 50 different games, which is not a lot of fun. But that's actually wrapping up hopefully this week. But I am really proud of that, as in terms of part of that was actually about the way that free culture projects end up doing remixing and et cetera, and trying to explore the way that communities actually happen. Because I think sometimes people think that you just have this kind of throw it out there attitude where you either just throw out some code or you throw out some artwork and everything will just come together. And I think this is actually a related thing where maybe even free culture has quite a bit to learn from free software, because we've come to learn in free software that that's not true. You don't just toss out a bunch of code and then magically a community appears. You have to work really hard on it. So in Liberated Pixel Cup, we tried really hard to create, a style guide so that artwork could, so that you could actually have artwork that actually looked like it meshed together and have games that were built out of that. I might be throwing this conversation way off topic, but it's something that I actually really care about, is trying to have the intersection of free software and free culture.
And yeah, no, I think it really is an important point. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in on you. I realize that it is a really, really important point. I think the free culture message and obviously they're great partners in free software, free culture are kind of made to go together in so many ways. I just thought it was really cool that you worked for Creative Commons, because obviously we all love Creative Commons. We should do. If you're listening to this and you don't know what Creative Commons is, just look it up. And find out, because you really should. We've got a couple of questions from IRC, from our IRC channel that's kind of buzzing along as we're talking here. So I just want to quickly get those in if we can. We've got a question from Brent11, who says, does Media Goblin use PIL, or Python Imaging Library, or something else?
It does currently use Python Imaging Library. There's actually been some conversations in the Media Goblin channel about whether or not something else might be used. If something else is used, I don't actually know if that'll happen at this time. Some people have suggested maybe there's been some conversations about whether or not we might move over to Gaggle, which is a library that the GIMP is using, because they apparently have some nice filters. Sometimes people come in and they say, oh, we should really be using ImageMagick. And sometimes, and there's been somebody who recently wanted to talk about Cairo. If we make a move away from Python Imaging Library, I think it'll only be because we end up finding out that it really is the best technical solution. But at the moment, we do use Python Imaging Library, yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And then we have another quick IRC question from Kevin Grenade in IRC, who says, you touched on self-hosting briefly. He says, do you have any plans to work with any other self-hosting projects, such as the Freedom Box or PageKite?
Oh, so I'm a big fan of PageKite, and I know some of the people from Freedom Box. I don't know too much about the exact technical direction of Freedom Box at the moment. So as in terms of PageKite, actually, when I do development of Media Goblin, usually I end up shooting up my own PageKite instance at cweber.pagekite.me. Now people might end up occasionally looking at the terrible works in progress things that I do. But anyway, I'm a big fan of PageKite, which, if people are not familiar with it, it's a cool tool that you can be on your laptop, on your desktop, or whatever. It's also free software under the AGPL. And if you're working on something that's in development, it can proxy your local machine up on its own instance, like up publicly, so you can get around a firewall or all the complicated issues with NATs and stuff like that. And so that's a really cool tool. I think you could use it if you wanted to be able to actually run a full instance off of your local machine as an actual proxy. Though I don't know if anybody's doing that, but a lot of Media Goblin developers do use PageKite for showing off their development while they're working on things. As for Freedom Box, I'm actually not quite sure of the exact technical directions of things, though I know a number of people in the project. Where I more actually have opinions on that at the moment is that the general idea of self-hosting at home, I actually think that my route to saying how we should actually tackle the hosting issue is to go at it from a number of different angles at once. One of the reasons that we did switch away from MongoDB to SQL is because some people wanted to be able to run things on smaller things like a Freedom Box and stuff like that. But I also think that a good way to go about it is to try to make it so that Media Goblin's very installable on things like VPSs and stuff like that, or on your own server at a data center, and then also installable on your home machine. So I'm not doing a lot of work to focus on making Media Goblin super installable on your home machine, but I think that if we're making something that's generically installable on various free software distributions, then I think we're going towards that direction already.
Excellent. And I think we've had a really good long chat about Media Goblin, and we could really talk about it all day. But is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to talk about in relation to kind of Media Goblin? Anything you feel we haven't covered?
Not really. I guess I should tell people who did donate to the campaign that finally their rewards will be appearing. Here's a 3D printed figurine. We're just getting that wrapped up. There's nothing really I can think of that we haven't talked about at the moment.
Okay, so what about maybe future plans? What's coming up? What in the future? What exciting things can we expect to see from Media Goblin?
That's an obvious direction that I should have thought of. Yes. So the future of Media Goblin. Well, as I said, I've been focusing a lot of work on working on plugin infrastructure right now, and right now, when that gets wrapped up, I'm actually hoping to see quite a few new plugins start to come and be built into Media Goblin. The big focus over the next year for me is to focus on working on Media Goblin federation support. Right now, there's stuff, and actually, in some ways, I actually feel a bit better that it's taken so long for us to get about that, because now things are changing with StatusNet is software that'll still continue to exist, but development is moving towards pump.io. And so I'm interested in seeing where the federation landscape ends up moving over the next few months. As for other things, a lot of the work that I want to do over the next year is polishing up the user interface, making things feel smoother, making deployment easier, having better plugin support and federation. Those are kind of the big things that are on my mind for the next year. And
another thing that we didn't quite talk about as much as I thought. I mean, we talked about the fact that this is a GNU project. How does it link in with the other GNU projects? Because I'm thinking of, say, GNU Social and things like that. Any plans to link in with those? What they're kind of doing there?
So there. As for that, I think in some ways Media Goblin being pulled in is partly trying to help figure out what that future is. I'm not sure what the exact direction of things, is. I know GNU Social has moved into becoming somewhat of a set of contributions to StatusNet. And as in terms of that direction, I mean, I think it's more we're trying to think about how to federate with the rest of the world. There's a new GNU list that started that's relevant to this. But I haven't had much time spending on it. But I am hoping that Media Goblin will help be kind of a guiding force for the future of the way that free software and the GNU project ends up working in this type of space. Whether or not it succeeds in that, I don't completely know. But there's no super specific plans about hooking into a bunch of other things other than some plans that we have to help kind of better incorporate with GNU packaging and et cetera.
Excellent. And Randall's away at the moment, but we have to. He has his favorite questions that we always ask everyone, and I think I might be able to guess your answers to these. But let's see anyway. So we always like to ask everyone who comes on what their favorite scripting language is. So, what's your favorite scripting language?
My favorite scripting language is Python. I enjoy it because it's highly readable, and I can wake up at 3 in the morning and look at some Python code and have a general idea of what's going on, which you can't say of many other languages. So I really enjoy that. Actually, my second favorite is still Lisp, but I find, and I'm probably already giving away what the second question is. But I don't find much use for Lisp other than Emacs Lisp. But I really enjoy coding in Emacs Lisp. I wish I found more excuses to use it, but Lisp is definitely not a language that you can wake up at 3 a.m. and have a sense of what's going on just by fuzzily staring at the code. So.
And as you said, I think you may have given away the answer there, but we do always like to ask people whether they prefer Emacs or VI. So I think I can guess, but what do you think?
Yeah, I'm definitely an Emacs person. I'm definitely in the extreme land of Emacs. I'm one of those people where in about 2005, when I started getting into it, I'm like, I'm not going to become one of those people. And then I totally became one of those people. There's a lot of stuff that I do in Emacs. I read my mail in Emacs. I go onto IRC on Emacs. I have tons of scripting stuff hooked into Emacs so that I can plug things away. My entire life is organized in org mode, which I think is been a life-changing thing for me. The number one reason to use Emacs, if you're not already, is to use org mode. And actually, the first contribution I ever had accepted into any major free software project, as in terms of code, was in Emacs. I found a bug in Emacs Tetris, which apparently I was the only person slacking off and playing, because I used to play it during class. And I found out that you could pause it, and you could still rotate, move, and put down the pieces. And I was like, oh man, this bug must have been in here for years. Like, how did nobody ever catch this? So I excitedly wrote up a patch. I submitted it to the Emacs development list, and I actually got the best response ever from RMS when he said, when you cheat at solitaire, who are you cheating? Thanks for the patch. So.
Okay, yeah, that sounds very, very RMS. Okay, then, so it's been really good to speak to you, Chris. Thanks for coming on and telling us about Media Goblin. How can people get involved if they want to get involved with the project? Is it head to MediaGoblin.org, best place to start, and then maybe sign up on the mailing list?
Yes, absolutely. Go to MediaGoblin.org. There is I forget if it's a community or a join page at the top, but you will find it up in the top. There's a bar up there then. But the main thing, and you can join the mailing list. I really encourage that. But the main development happens in the Media Goblin IRC channel. If you go to #MediaGoblin on irc.freenode.net, people are very active there. We have a really good community. And if you want to get involved, go on our wiki, try setting up your own instance via the hacking how-to. As I said, we're a very welcoming community. I believe in getting contributions from all different areas. We really value people whether or not they want to contribute on a code level or on documentation or on helping with our graphic design and user experience. We really value a really important contribution, in fact, is to just set up and run your own Media Goblin instance and become a user and help us gain feedback on how to make Media Goblin better. But I really value getting new contributors. So if anybody's wondering, should they get involved in Media Goblin, the answer is yes. Please, absolutely, our community.
Excellent. So, Chris, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us. It's been a pleasure, and we wish you best of luck with Media Goblin in the future, and we look forward to seeing where the project goes.
All right, thank you.
So that was Chris Webber of the Media Goblin project. And if you want to find out more about Media Goblin, you need to head to their website, which is MediaGoblin.org. That's the best place to start. And a really interesting discussion, I thought, Randy. So what did you think?
I think it looks really cool. I mean, I haven't actually used anything quite like that since it is a gallery, like way back when. I mean, I've been using Flickr for a while, but I don't really like monthly fees or having to depend on their weird infrastructure and their rules. So I'm actually thinking of installing this and playing with it on my own.
Excellent. And yeah, I've got to be honest. I mean, before, Media Goblin's one of the things I've heard a lot about, being kind of involved a little bit in the free software community and knowing a lot of people in GNU Project and so on. Something I've been told quite a lot about, but I've got to confess, I hadn't actually really had time to look at it before doing research for this show. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting project, and it doesn't seem like there's really anything quite like it out there at the moment. Certainly free software-wise, anyway. And the whole point of kind of promoting free software, or open source through web services, I think it's a really interesting one, because we talked a little bit about marketing, and I think you were really right in that point that if you believe in open source and you believe in freedom and all the rest of it, you've really got to promote that message.
Yeah, marketing isn't just going out there and, telling people things to get them to use your project. It's about letting them know about their options, about getting these new ideas out there and finding a way to get your messaging out there so people understand exactly what it is that you're doing. And it's not even necessarily to have them use your stuff, it's also so they just realize that there are those options. I think I just repeated myself, but it's early.
That's okay. Don't worry. So we should tell you what's coming up on the show now. Randall is away at the moment, as you know, but we've got some great stuff coming up. We got some great hosts as well. Aaron's going to be in next week. Aaron Newcomb's going to be in as the host, and he's going to have Zootonic, which is an Erlang web framework. He says subtly, looking at his screen to see what it is. It is an Erlang web framework. So that's coming up next week, which is the 20th, February the 20th at the usual time. The 27th, I don't think we've got a guest scheduled at the moment, so we may have a break in that week. But then the week after, we've got the 6th of March, Wednesday the 6th of March. We've got Cake PHP. Which is the PHP web framework, which I'm sure a lot of people know, PHP development framework. And we got lots of other great guests coming up. If you want to find out who's going to be on the show, there's a Google spreadsheet which you can look at. If you go to twit.tv/floss, you'll get all of the latest episodes of Floss Weekly. And there's a link on there which says upcoming guests. If you click on that, you'll get to have a look behind the scenes at our spreadsheet of who's coming up. And if you have a look through the list and you think, oh, there's a really great project that I know of that should be on there and it's not, the best thing to do is to contact the project leader, if you can, and have them contact Randall, because it's kind of difficult to line things up, and that's the easiest way to get to the top of the list, top of our upcoming guest list. So they need to email merlin@stonehenge.com. That's merlin@stonehenge.com, which is Randall's address. Send him an email, and we can hopefully get them into the schedule and get them scheduled in. And in the meantime, I should tell you to follow us on Twitter. You can find us Floss Weekly. You can find us on Google Plus. You can find us on I think on Facebook as well, though I should have checked that. But all over the place. Just do a search for Floss Weekly, and always you can find us at twit.tv, the main website. I haven't got much to mention personally in the way of kind of plugs and things, and we've chatted for quite a while. So I'll just say check out my website, which is kind of, if you're looking at the video, which is in the bottom of the screen right there, danlynch.org, you can find out all the kind of stuff I'm up to there on my blog and all of my social network stuff. So, Randy, is there anything you want to plug? Anything you want to tell us about?
Well, I'm going to be working at ECCC, so if there's any of you comic book nerds out there, what's up? I'll be there. That's about
Excellent.
it. I don't have much going on in the world of open source right now.
Well, I am a comic book nerd, which not a lot of people don't know. So I really wish I could get to that show, but unfortunately, the transatlantic trip is a bit of a hike for me. Brilliant. So thank you very much for coming on and joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So really appreciate you coming on and co-hosting.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. It's been a long time.
Excellent. And that'll do us for this week, I think. So come back next week and join Aaron for the next Floss Weekly. But until then, stay free, stay open source, and stay Floss.